welcome to another episode of Conversations, the show where we have conversations that maybe if we had more of them at work, we would have some workplaces where people feel just a little bit more like people. And today I'm really excited because I feel like this conversation has been coming for a while. An opportunity for us to focus on accessibility. And it's something that, so I grew up with an aunt in a wheelchair, for those of you who don't know that about me. And one of the things that was always really easy for me to see was when things weren't physically accessible for people. And the more and more we learn about people and neurotypes and all of these different things, there's just a kind of an ongoing learning opportunity, shall we call it, of what may be accessible and what may not be accessible. And one of the things I'm really excited to kind of work through in our conversation today is just looking at when we're not intentionally thinking about inclusion on an accessibility level, how are we unintentionally leaving people out? And I could think of no better person to have this conversation with than my friend Sydney. They have been doing so much great work in this arena, and so I'm going to let them tell you about it instead of me telling you about it. So Sydney, tell us a little bit more about yourself and why accessibility is so important to you.
Yes, so growing up, I had a speech impediment, first and foremost. I couldn't say my R's properly. I spoke too fast. Everyone made fun of me. I had to leave class to go do speech therapy. People were like, "Where are you going? Where'd you go? Where do you go when you leave class?" And all these things. And I'm lucky I had that support and got that accommodation. When it came to, other things like my constant distraction in class or not paying attention and not understanding things, I didn't understand what that was, So, and I was like, okay, that's weird, but maybe it's this my speech therapy. I didn't know because I'm just a kid. And so, and growing up, I realized that I had more challenges than other kids my age and people my age, but also knowing that, okay, when I got the supports I needed, I could thrive. But I was also, my parents did the best, but there were some gaps and things are expensive. Accommodation is expensive for kids, especially. And so I saw that. And then I remember when I was in school, in university now, I was in my employment law class and we were talking about accommodation in the workplace for a case study. And a lot of my classmates, so some already in HR, about to go into HR, and they were like, people with disabilities actually want to enter the workplace. And look, I'm sitting right here, and those barriers of like, why do they want to be accommodated? They shouldn't even be into the workplace, all these things. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be focusing on HR and accessibility because it's so important. And at the same time, I was also working in a recreational setting, helping teens, adults, and kids with disabilities. And one of my friends, actually, she has spina bifida, uses a wheelchair, uses a power chair. And our supervisors were literally supporting people with disabilities in our settings, in our work setting, but they still weren't accommodating her. They still were, being very ableist towards her. And just like all these experiences, the combination made me, okay, I'm going to do this at each company I go to. But then the pandemic happened. And I realized, a lot of companies are now focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, but not really focusing on accessibility. And so I was like, okay, now's the time. I'm starting my own business to light fires under businesses. So.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I loved even from the first time we met is just that when you have a journey that has shown you so often that there are huge gaps in accessibility, it's I mean, I like to say it's my kind of people feel like they go and fix those gaps instead of just accepting that those gaps exist. Welcome, Andrew, to the show. Something I will say before we head into the conversation is this is a show for all of us. And so if you are watching live, please let us know that you're here. And also, we would love to hear your perspectives, your experiences, your questions about our topic today, which is accessibility, because the more well-rounded, the more voices we get in the conversation, the more we all get to learn and take away things that we can implement in our daily lives. So please get in the chat. We love to hear everybody's perspectives. All right, Sydney. So let's just let's maybe, I mean, I will tell you, even in your intro, I struggle with the word disability because
Mhm.
me, it convinces people that there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And I know that this has become very common in the neurodiversity arena as well,
Mhm.
to speak about it as a disability. And one of the things that I feel that I was very lucky to experience
Mhm.
growing up, because I had an aunt in a wheelchair, was that, well, her legs don't work. She had spina bifida
Mhm.
as well, and like her legs never worked. And so she, when we were kids, she would ride us
Mhm.
around on her wheelchair, and just like, she's a person, right?
Yeah.
She has dreams, she has desires, she has, like, the lady had the most insane trivia knowledge of anyone I've ever met in
I
my
love trivia.
life. You guys could test each other maybe, but this is like, this is just a unique piece of this
Mhm.
person, and it's only one piece of the person.
Mhm.
So I'd love to know in the conversations that, because I know you host webinars and conversations
Yes.
as well when it comes to accessibility. So in that conversation, is there a shift or a pivot that we can make in our language when we talk about quote unquote
Mhm.
disabilities?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are scared to use the word disability. They don't, and I think right now we're reclaiming that language disability, what it actually means. People thought like, oh, if you can't say that word, it's a bad word. It's not a bad word. That's first and foremost. It's not a bad word, and it's like, how do you intend it when you say it? You know, and always going back to the, like you said, back to the person. How do they want to identify when it comes to neurodiversity? A lot of people are like, oh, you have to say person with autism and separate them from autism. But the person wants to be like, no, I'm autistic, I reclaim that, such as myself, I do that, and be like, that's empowering. But taking back that language, and ultimately, I always say, make the joke, call the person by their name. Like, call them, the person who they are. And like you said, there's so many sides to people, and just understanding, okay, how do they identify? How can I best support them, and lift up what they're messaging for themselves, and just being really mindful of the language you're using. And I think a lot of people, especially now with the cancel culture and political correctness, is such a huge thing. But I think ultimately it goes back to the individual person and just listening to what they have to say about how they want to identify.
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, I say this a lot too, right? And I'm a personal branding coach. So for me, it's kind of just
Yes.
like, you own your personal brand and it's unique from anybody else's
Mm-hmm.
brand. And there's so many different pieces of your mosaic that goes into
Mm-hmm.
it. And I love what Samina here is sharing, that I've started saying I belong to the neurodiverse community. And that I also like living with.
Mm-hmm.
I am living with a 4-year-old. Is that a disability? Because sometimes I feel like it is. I think this is really important, and I also think it's important because not everyone will want to use the same language, right? There
Exactly.
might be people who are physically disabled who really don't like being
Mm-hmm.
considered disabled, and equally maybe in the neurodiverse community or wherever that you are. And it's also, I was on a podcast called Green Zone, which is about neurodiversity thriving. And one of the things that the host had said is that her daughter, I can't remember if it was autism or which neurodiverse arena it was, but her daughter had found a group of people who did this and also liked to do a similar activity. So they're all like in the same space together, and it was a place that they belonged, right? They belong together. And so in that space, you don't feel like you're different when the world loves to make you feel different. I just want to also say Samina's agreeing with me that the 4-year-old thing is a disability.
Hi, Sam.
And hi, Maria. So great to see you too. These are things that it's important to pay attention to on an individual level. So
Yes.
when you are looking at things in like a school scenario, an educational facility scenario, or if you're looking at things in a business scenario, what are some of the activities that are helpful for individual people in being able to get curious about how someone might identify?
Yeah, so I think right now a lot of companies are using ERG groups, employee resource groups. And actually, I keep talking to people, and they're kind of getting frustrated with this, like disability ERG groups and neurodiversity ERG groups, because a lot of parents of kids are going to these groups. And it's like, okay, that's great. We love that support. We love, that you, but it's also having that lived experience is very different from being a parent that has that experience. And so, and the parents, understanding that's okay. I identify in having a space where, oh, you're neurodivergent like me, or you have a disability like me, having that space. And so creating that work environment and creating, and then like I remember I spoke at a company last year, and they literally reached out to me because they have a neurodiversity ERG group that's led by neurodiverse employees. And that was the first time I seen that, and I was so blown away. I was like, "That's incredible!" Like, and I was an extension of that. I think I'm so thankful for that. And they end up having more members after. They're like, "Oh, this is what you guys are doing." And people can get curious about how they want to identify, where they want to show up, and how they want to show up.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so funny because I feel like some of these things, they like seem so simple, right? Mm-hmm. And we just have to do them. Right? We just have to do them. And I think you mentioned a really important thing too in your example about the neurodiversity group, is that it was run by neurodiverse employees. Because I also think that sometimes this becomes like an HR thing, and then like the HR manager or the chief people officer or whatever thinks that they are responsible for heading up all of these groups. And if you don't identify with a given group, then that's hard for all parties, right? It's hard for you to run something that supports people who have a need that you don't have. And likewise, it's hard for the people participating. So something that I feel like we need to talk about is this concept of this psychological safety, and even being able to like state that I'm this, right? Like maybe my company is awesome and is trying to create all of these spaces for different groups of people. And in order for, I have to accept, like I have to accept the invite. So let's start from the business perspective. From the business perspective, what are some things, let's kind of flip the question on its head. What are some things that actively decrease psychological safety that we can look for in our organizations and try and get rid of?
Yeah, I think a lot of the management training in general is a huge problem when it comes to psychological safety. And I've been talking to people about this all week for last year too. Like I just keep talking about this because even my partner, he recently became a manager. He's like, I don't know how to be a manager. I was good at my old job. I don't know how to be a manager. And people like, oh, the issue is that managers don't know how to accommodate for people with disabilities and they're divergent. But it's like there's a bigger issue there. The managers don't know how to manage, period.
And don't know how to manage anybody, little someone who might need an accommodation.
And so just when it comes to like that succession planning, it's like, okay, do they have, I was actually talking to Piper yesterday that attended Business Peeps the other day, and we were talking about how the very bare minimum what they should have is empathy, and you should see that they have empathy for other people. And it's okay, that's a good skill set and something that's kind of innate. Like it can be taught, but it's like it's mostly innate if you have empathy or not. And so we're like, okay, that person is very naturally cares about other people and helping others. They would make a good manager, not someone that was good at the previous job and deserves promotion. You know what I mean?
Well, so, that's so common, right? And the corporate ladder has really been built on that, right? Oh, hi, Piper. Piper is here.
Yay, that's Piper. Yeah, she heard me talking about her.
And this is the thing. I know so many people that are in the exact same scenario, right? They were really good at their job, and then they got promoted because it's the next step on the ladder moving up. But we don't give people any opportunities to focus on their people skills. And a lot of times, I saw this a lot because I worked in software. And so people who are really good coders will get promoted to a manager or a director. And they're like, and maybe they care about people things. It's just their entire career, they've never had to, right? It's never been part of their job. So to influence that back into your day-to-day is a complete like 180
And I
degree
think some
shift.
companies don't understand. Like it's like, okay, you have to do a vertical expansion, a vertical promotion. You could do horizontal promotion, you know, but a lot of
I
times
would love
that's
that.
not ingrained in a culture, to be like, okay, and I'll like even like have the horizontal. It's like, okay, start introducing those people skills. Start, to end up doing that vertical if you have to, but giving them more exposure to their coworkers and working on a project together, building that and not just automatically, oh, gotta go up the ladder.
Right. I think that's so often for my husband as well, because I'm like,
Mhm.
this guy just really loves what he does. Why can't he like move up laterally? Right? Like, why
Yes,
can't he become like a specialist and then a hyper
exactly.
specialist? And then I'm like, you need me, some kind of specialist. It's depicted. That's obviously not good
Mhm.
news. But like that there's ways to grow besides growing to manage people, because managing people, I think to some degree it is, like you said, it's innate in you. Is
Mhm.
it something? I remember actually once my husband and I had this conversation in the car, and he was like, this guy and this guy. And like, I use this phrase mental calories, and he uses it back to
Mhm.
me. So he was like, I just don't like spending my mental calories on people problems. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh, this is so interesting, because the number one thing I would choose to burn my mental calories on is people problems, people challenges. I like to say,
Yeah.
I don't think people have problems. That, like, I love that. If I can, the more I can spend my time, effort, and energy
Mhm.
thinking about people and their experience and how it could be better and how we could be more creative,
Mhm.
there's like, it just, that feels fun for me. And so that's the type of insights that are helpful in creating managers, instead of just saying, you did really good at this job for 5 years and now we're going to
Mhm.
move you up to management because that's the next step in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I think that also goes with accessibility. It's like that burns your husband's mental calories. It's like that's not what he likes to do.
No.
You that energizes you, that gets you going. And so playing to people's strengths, that's ultimately accessibility, and being like, okay, what do you want to do? What do you like to do? How can we best support you? Just asking those questions and start breaking down those barriers. And people are like, oh, but it's too much work to ask each individual, and impacts and productivity. I'm like, in the end, it improves employee morale and increases productivity because the people are liking what they're doing. They know they're supported in what they're doing, and it does make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And Sam here is sharing too that managing people is a skill in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And skill by nature is something that needs to be built.
Over
Right?
time.
We need to do things that allow us to build up a skill. If I'm going to have a skill of dribbling a basketball, I have to dribble a basketball lots of times.
Mhm.
Right? You can't just be a good people manager. You have to learn how to be a people manager. Piper is sharing required manager training for supporting others' strengths. Okay, I want to come back to the strengths thing, but before we go there, I want to go back to where we started this piece of the conversation, which is, what are some things companies can look for that
Yes.
don't promote psychological safety? And I want to go back to the individual employee and
Mhm.
their relationship in that,
Mhm.
because, like Sam said, there's a lot of stigma
Mhm.
with specific things, and you bring stigma with you, right? You might have
Yes.
experienced it in school, like you did, Sydney. You might have experienced it just in your community. You might have experienced it in your family, right? And so, how can, as an individual, we start to explore the our connection to a specific stigma so we can move past that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of times stigma, like I have stigma, which I have CPTSD, and people are like, what? You can't tell by looking at me. It's like, but you don't seem traumatized. You don't seem when it comes to mental health disabilities and all these things, and just being like, I'm not that. Like that's or like realizing it's like, okay. Do I fall into that stigma? But it's like ultimately, you don't, and realizing how to break free from that and being like, this is I can be successful with what I have, and just challenging the norms. I know easier said than done, but really start thinking about, okay, who am I? Like, kind of goes back to your thing, personal branding. Who am I? What do I want to do? And the things I've experienced and the things that I have don't make they're a huge part of me, but that's not all of who I am. And so really understanding who you are at the end of the day.
Yeah. I remember this commercial, and I I might have referenced it before on this show, and I'm not sure if it just aired in Canada, but there was this commercial where all of these people were wearing a whole bunch of labels, right? And they're like labels that other people have put on them.
I think I've seen that commercial.
Yeah, you're too loud, difficult, shy, right? Like, and they all have these different labels. And I can't actually remember what the commercial was for, but everything about that just says to me, like, at the end of the day, we decide what label we accept. And so sometimes accepting a label can be empowering. Right? The example I always use is that I did the like Harry Potter house sorting thing, and I was a Hufflepuff, and I was like, yes, I accept this about me. I'm so Hufflepuff, right? And you know, like, if you don't know Harry Potter, you won't know
Slytherin.
See, and this is like, because a lot of people would be like, ooh, Slytherin, and if you're like, yeah, Slytherin, this is
I'm
about
ambitious.
like yeah. And like, anyway, there's lots of good things about all of the things, but the important piece of that is that you own that, right? And it, like, similar to like we were talking about earlier, maybe it empowers you to be like, yeah, I am part of this disabled advocacy group because I'm disabled, right? And maybe some people don't like that. But at the end of the day, from that like personal experience of the stigma, it's really more like how do we accept that, right? Oh, Sam's a Ravenclaw. Okay, so where's the Gryffindors? Any Gryffindors? Oh, I clicked on you, Asana. I'm sure you have a good comment too. Knowing who you are makes it harder for outside forces to dictate your decisions.
Yeah. You know, when you know who you are at the end of the day, like I remember when I was in high school, I had no idea who I was. You know, I call myself a chameleon when I was in high school because I was obviously very struggling with my mental health, my disabilities, and all these different things. And so I got into some bad crowds, unfortunately, but I also would hang with my best friend that I currently have now, but hang out with his friends. I would be all over the map. Depending on how I felt that day, right? And I remember also we had a school called Park Home, which is also a school for people with disabilities. And I would go volunteer there and go hang out with them. And I was like, this is where I feel most me, you know? I just, you know, and so realizing where when you understand yourself, there's no room for people to, you know, it basically washes over you. You know, when you don't know who you are, you're like, who am I? And you just doubt yourself and you question yourself. But when you're so unabashed with yourself, you know, you're like, you can think whatever you want of me. I don't care. And I've reached that point because for so long I didn't know who I was. And I'm like, okay, I'm a weird Slytherin, you know, who likes to use the voice for good.
And it's funny too, because I have, like, when I hear you use that word weird, there's like an ownership of it, right? Like, I'm weird and I love it. And I say this to my son all the time. I'm like, the crazy people are the best people, right? Because their ideas are just like, that's where new, cool creativity, innovation comes from, right? And my perspective, but I identify as being somewhat crazy, right? And I love that. And if someone said to me, you're crazy, and they thought that was bad, I'd be like, oh, you're right. I am crazy. And I love it. But we all have those things, right? This is a fun activity that I like to do with my clients, is when people say something to you and you're like, ooh, yeah, I like that about me. Imagine that as you taking that label and sticking it on you, right? I always think this when people tell me I'm refreshing, right? I'm like, ooh, yes, I love being refreshing. Stick my sticker on. And equally, if someone says you're something you don't believe yourself to be, then don't let it stick, right? You're just like, that's fine. You can think what you want about me. And at the end of the day, we can't control other people's experience. I mean, like, we can show up with specific intentions and things like that, but we don't know everybody's background. Sam was saying, I have a ton of baggage. We all have a ton of baggage, Sam.
It's a lot to carry.
We're all just toting around these big Harry Potter trunks of baggage. And yes, yay to weird and crazy. This is why we're friends. And we all have that, right? And we all have things that we identify as, and we all have things that we don't identify as. And at the end of the day, only you get to decide what that is. And if someone else wants to say I'm trying to think of something that I would think is offensive to me, but I'm not really offended by anything. But it's just, I'm kind of offended that Dan has been my friend for so long and he's still making jokes about Harry Potter. Come on, man. But these are the things, like, we get to decide. So I just want, as much as a lot of this conversation is focused around, like, what can businesses do to create space?
It's all connected. It's all connected because
Pete's got to come and do their part.
Yeah, it's all connected. So, like, talking about who we are at work is accessibility at work, bringing our whole selves to work, the intersectionality about it all, understanding what a person brings, how to best support them. I see your weird, you see my weird, like, I see you, how can I help you, how can I support you? That is accessibility at work.
And it's so, I'm not going to say it quite right, but there's a Dr. Seuss quote that's like, it's about weirdness, and then when we get together in mutual weirdness, we call it love. And I'm like, that's a topic for a different day about love in the workplace, because I have a lot to say about that. But it's not about, like, being the same. It's about having this, like, cool kind of mutual weirdness where we can be like, yeah, I see your weirdness and I like it. Right? So when I think of that, it kind of brings me back to this concept of, I guess, really at the end of the day, what my brain is saying is open-mindedness, right? That I'm not supposed to be the exact same as my coworker. And I always thought, like, as a hiring manager, I was like, why would I want to hire someone like me? I already have me. I don't need someone like me. I need someone who's, like, as different from me as possible, because then we get different skills, different perspectives, and that's how we grow and learn and do awesome things. I don't need more of me. I have that already. And so, I like this t-shirt idea. I see you're weird. Not, I see that you're weird. I see you're weird. Yeah, and own it. And I like it. And on the back it says, do you see mine?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, yes. That's what I was thinking.
Because now this takes me in a different direction, because it's that says a lot to me about belonging.
Yes.
Right? Like, I see you're weird and you see mine, and we like each other anyways. And to me, that's really the belonging, that interrelational piece of people. So when we're talking about accessibility, how does belonging come into play with that?
Yeah. So understanding, again, like, belonging in, like, oh, I can have access to what I need. Because, like, for example, you get so many files sent at work and all these different things, and getting what you need in a different way. And, like, a lot of times, for example, with ADHD, talking about how do you best understand instructions, because a lot of times now we have Zoom meetings, or you just have a verbal conversation. Oh, can you do X, Y, and Z task? And the person's be like, they're gonna forget, like, always. But, like, that's it's shown to be a thing, and so it's like, what was the thing? Okay, that was one of them, and they get sidetracked, and understanding, it's like, okay, if you wrote it down in an email or sent a Slack message, if the team uses Slack, or just having that written information of the verbal communication you said, the person can refer back to it. Okay, this is exactly what the person wants me to do, and just it's more clear, and that that allows them to belong how they best need to belong in the organization, to be able to do their tasks efficiently and be like, oh, I do belong. The person knows I don't understand. I need help with verbal cues, and so I don't need that. Having it written instead, they'll allow me to belong in the way I need to belong, and they're giving me the support I need to succeed in the organization.
Well, and I think one of the things this is making me think too, that you mentioned this at the beginning, is that people think it will take too long, right? That it's going to be too much of an investment to do it. And one example that I have in my own past was that I was in a, like, management shift. I ended up managing the, like, IT support person. Because as a company, we had decided I, as a person, was the best person to manage him as a person. And it didn't have anything to do with departments or anything, but just as a
Mhm.
man. And so we use Slack, and we would have these Slack like back and forths, and
Mhm.
it would take forever. Right, we'd go back and forth
Yeah.
and back and forth, and I'd be like, "We're not accomplishing anything." And one day he was like, "You know, it would be a lot more productive for me if we had like a 5-minute conversation at
Mhm.
the beginning of every day, and I could just like get really clear on what you need from
Mhm.
me today, and I go out and do it." And I was like, this sounds awesome. And so we had those every day,
Mhm.
and most of the time they weren't even 5 minutes. And I was like, this is way more productive. It's
Mhm.
way more productive. So I think we're being a little short-sighted sometimes to say like,
Mhm.
to know these things about all of our employees will take too long. Is there a learning process? Sure, right? It's going to take you some
Mhm.
time, especially if you manage a lot of people, which I always frown upon. These people who are like, I manage 150 people. Do you?
Mhm.
150 people
Yeah.
report to you, but do you actively
That the two
manage?
two different things.
Yeah. Let's be honest about what we're doing here. And so when we take the initiative to learn those things, it can
Mhm.
be more productive, and it's more productive. The employee
Mhm.
feels seen, right?
Mhm.
Like, hey, I just like need this from you, and you're like, yeah, great.
Mhm.
And pros for everybody, right?
I literally say to employers and to HR teams and managers, I'm like, ask like have like a check-in basis with your employees. Do they need it daily to understand the daily task? Do they need it weekly? Do they need it monthly? What's the timeline? What are their expectations? And just having that open conversation with them, and then you'll be and then when they start seeing that you actually care, that they are checking in when I said to check in, they are doing these things, then it leads to more productivity, it leads to more trust, it leads to fostering that relationship, and it just it's a great thing.
That's what I mean. I feel like a lot of times when we have these types of conversations, I'm like, I really don't see the cons to doing this. This just seems like pros. But maybe it's the way I frame it. So Osana has a great question, but before we go there, I think you should know, Osana, that Sam is getting her cred cut and making these t-shirts. So Sam, if you legitimately make those, please let all of us
Yes,
on
include
here and
us.
in this chat know first dibs. Okay, great. um So Asana's question is, how can organizations create a space where employees can approach them to
Mhm.
communicate and let them know the best way they receive information?
Yeah, I think understanding and having like just like a training or having a session where it's like, hey, talking about how I think when the onboarding process, that's a huge part when people are coming to the organization, being like, hey, if you need anything anytime, feel free to reach out. And and having that setting that time aside when they first join the organization, where someone's already established in the organization, just reaching out to your employees, send a message, send an email. If you guys need any help at any time, just reach out to us, and then actually start doing it. Results and actually doing it is a thing. And at first it might be a little weird, like you said, it might take a bit longer. And that once you get into the pattern of doing that, it's all about patterns. And so when you start doing that and breaking down those barriers, you'll see that a change will happen. And also, it goes back to the inclusive culture, right? Understanding that having trainings or having workshops and having people come in, oh, our company does care enough to have these workshops, to have these trainings, or have these things in place, and then when you actually start implementing what you learn in those workshops and those trainings, because sometimes you just have those trainings and workshops just to say, oh yeah, we did it, but
Yeah,
actually start
check a box.
implementing those tools that you learned into the organization. Like one of my clients, I remember when I first started, actually I just focused on employers and coworkers. And because I was like, oh, employees know where they need to be supported if they're an individual. And then I took a step back and was like, oh, like they know where they need to be supported, but I need to be able to give them that resource to be like, oh, I can ask for these things. I can ask for these supports. And so, and I did see a shift when I did that. So like employers were messaging me, the employee that saw my talk, came to my workshop at that company, they messaged me on LinkedIn like, hey, I now told my employer what I need, because, just starting that conversation, starting that dialogue, and employees be like, oh, we're actually talking about this, and it kind of like plants the seed that can create a beautiful flower.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think It's funny. So I'm coaching a gentleman right now, and one of the things that he's concerned about, he has a lot of trauma and a stutter, and just like kind of working on figuring stuff out. And like, how much of this do I let people know? Right? Do I just hide this, and then like I look quote unquote normal? Which isn't a thing, by the way. There's no such thing as a normal human, like the average human. It's not a thing. And so like, how can I show up with like more of me, but not too much of me? And one of the things that I believe is that, so for me, when I worked in corporate, I hired you to do a job. So as far as I'm concerned as a manager, it's my job to make it possible for you to do your job, right? And for you to do your job the best way possible. And if that means that you need to go twice a week for therapy to do your best job possible, you go twice a week to therapy. If you need to have, one of my employees had like very severe anxiety problem. And it's like so much so to the point that he would just like disappear for like hours at a time. And I'm like, we all think that this is productive because one, I'm now stressed out because I don't know where he is and I don't know if he's safe. And two, he's not working, right? So wouldn't it just be better for us to have a conversation about the types of things that are creating this anxiety so we can try to avoid
and
it?
Understanding, it's like, I give this example when I was talking to Dr. Kevin on his podcast the other day, but it's so relevant. It's like understanding what you need to be successful at work. And ultimately, your manager wants you to be successful. They want you to be successful in your job. They want you to do the job, like you said. And so being like, is that more time required? Is that, on Thursdays you have to go to therapy? What does that look like? You don't have to disclose everything, and you don't even have to disclose it all. Just like, hey, I need this support to be able to do my job better and more efficiently. And to always go back to that case, because it makes such a difference, because then it's like, oh, okay, this person needs X, Y, and Z, needs more resources, need more tools, need more time, and just needs a little bit more support right now. Or for example, I worked at a company called Skills for Change in the summer of 2021. And I was very open because again, I was like, I passed my accessibility in HR, and they're like, okay, cool. And they're like, and then I was like, because of my own lived experience. And so when I was working there, it was an anniversary of a traumatic incident that I experienced. And so I was just transparent with my supervisor, and I was like, hey, today my productivity levels are low. I just was saying that, I'm going to get my job done. Can I modify? Can we change around how I do things? Can we have the meeting in the afternoon instead? Maybe I'll feel better then, and start getting to, can I do some alone work for now? And just having that conversation and being open about what you need. And, you don't have to disclose why, it's like, I need this if you want me to do the job, this is what I need to do so.
And this is what I mean. There's definitely well, let's not call them leaders because they're not leaders. They're just managers. There's managers out there who don't want to make any accommodations for anybody, right? And they want to just have everybody run exactly the same way. And that's about control. That's about a person controlling other people. For me, like my background is in marketing and sales. There are 0 to sales people who are the same, who can like effectively work at the exact same time of day, making the exact same amount of calls, having the exact same conversation. No. And so to pretend that you can manage that and that is going to lead to the best production from your people is just, quite honestly, bonkers.
Yes.
To get the best out of each person, regardless of how they identify. I always think of this one example. I was VP of marketing at the time. Our VP of sales was just like, he sitting in his office, and I'm like, there's something going on here, because he doesn't have his regular energy, right? And I asked him, and he was waiting for a phone call to find out if his wife had cancer. And so his wife was at home waiting for the phone call, and he was at work waiting for her to call him. And I was like, you need to go home. You need to go home right now. Yeah. You need to go, because one, that's stressful for her. It's stressful for you because you can't be there for her because she's stressed out. Just like, go home. This is corporate sales, right? If you take an afternoon off, this business isn't going to go out of business.
It'll be okay.
Yeah. And so I think it's really just about like coming back to like, can we treat people like people? There's no such thing as an average person. So we can't just say we're going to treat all people the same, right? To get to have the most productive business, we need to. It's not really optional. We have to. We have to look at how are we, and even if, again, like accommodations is a thing to me that just, well, usually it makes me think of a hotel room. But it's like, what do I do as a business, as a leader, to help my people be their most awesome selves?
Exactly.
Right? That's it. And it's not an accommodation. It's me looking at a person as a unique person and saying, what can I do to make you the most productive person? You can be doing the things that are most meaningful to you. And it's just really not that hard if the people who are the leaders or managers, depending on your experience of that, have that focus and have that intention.
Yeah. And understanding that, I think a lot of times when people think accommodation, they think medical. You know, it's like, oh, medical doctors know all that. It's like reasonable accommodation, just modifying the job duties, having that conversation with someone, you know, understanding. Like even with accommodation, people are like, oh, I need to know what accommodation you need before you start your first day of work, right? But that's mostly in a medical sense as of now, you know, so we can get your documentation, see what medical accommodation you need. But I think it should also start being asking people, what accommodation do you need, just in general, not even just not medical, just what do you need to be successful when you actually show up to work?
And so let's talk about this. What I want to share Sam's comment here because it's great. For the first time in my life this week, I let my interviewer know that I belong to the neurodiverse community and my strengths and weaknesses because of it. This was because I knew the company was open and embraced hiring people who are neurodiverse. And like, that's also hiring people to check a neurodiverse box and being about supporting people of different neurotypes are two completely different things. But there's so much bravery in that still, Sam, because there's lots of places where you probably don't feel like it's safe to do that. And lots of other people have that experience. So kind of going back to Asana's question about how do organizations create the space to let people know, I think there's also, I've experienced this as a leader anyway, a lot of people who don't know, aren't familiar with what type of accommodations would be helpful for them. And so in your experience, Sydney, what are some things or maybe workshops, types of topics where people can start to explore for themselves? Oh, what is helpful for me? Like I am a conversational processor. I learn things and get new ideas by being in conversation with people. When I was in corporate, I didn't know that about myself. And therefore I did not get the opportunity to do that. So what are some ways that maybe employee groups or a company as a whole could look at creating space for employees to figure out about themselves?
I think, you know, just creating that safe space and goes, you know, and figuring it's like, okay, we understand that people are not the same. And that, again, accommodation and people look different day to day, depending on, like you said, your example of the man that was waiting for his wife to call him with the news. It's like that was situational. You know, he had that situation where he was like, he couldn't perform as well because he was anxious and scared for his wife and he couldn't be there for this whole thing. And just being open and understanding that, okay, what do employees need, you know, and looking at, sorry, so something came up on my screen, distracted me. Understanding what employees need, and, you know, giving that space. I think ERG groups is such a great resource, you know, because it creates a sense of community and they can start working on things within the company, you know, and be like, hey, and a lot of times with that too, though, ERG groups are not paid. You know, it's just like, it's voluntary. And I think, you know, having some incentive to do the ERG group, and if you want to see that change and make that difference in the workplace, but also being like, having that safe space to have these ERG groups and having these conversations and breaking down, be like, hey, I need more support with this. and just having that sense of community at work. And the term, oh yeah, we're a family. I don't think you're a family at work, but I think you should be a community at work.
Yeah, and I think that it's an important, I mean, people have used the word family at work for a long time, and I always thought about like my relationship with my own family, which is like, I love you. And if it came down, like push comes to shove, I will do whatever I need to do to help you. But like, we don't hang out on a day-to-day basis. We don't go for beers, right? Like we don't solve the world's problems, right? Like those aren't the types of activities I do with my family. These are the types of activities you might need me to do at work, not the beer drinking thing. But like you might need me to solve a problem in a like defined amount of time, right? Like my family's not helpful with that for me, right? So like, do I want to create that at work? Anyway, I think there's lots of problems with the relationship between workspaces and families, but this is true, right? And I think when we talk about community, there's a piece that's about being seen, right? So like, I see you. It's not just like a sea of people I don't know. It's people that I know. It's people that I have something in common with, right? Which is why the ERG groups are great. But if we see the benefits of doing it, then why don't we make it more of a priority? Right?
Exactly.
We do. I still feel like, and you would know this better than me, Sydney, but I still feel like that this is very much a like checking the box exercise. And if we can, so let's end on this today. How do we transition from, okay, we get the importance of this. And the easiest thing is to create a check the box ERG groups. Let's create groups for all these things and then we solve the problem. Probably not. How do we move from a check the box mentality to really making accessibility an intentional business practice?
I think knowing it's not just a checklist approach and maybe, ironically, having more checklist of things you should actually implement. More, you know what I mean? Like, actually, it's like, oh, having accessibility training, and what was the main takeaways from that training that you have to start implementing? And it's like, okay, and also like doing an assessment beforehand. Okay, what happened before the training? How are we doing all these things? How are we doing for accessibility? How are we doing for all these areas? Are people feeling belonged and that they can be seen at work? Are they being, how do they feel after the training? Are they more seen? Okay. And then having main takeaways. I send my clients like main takeaways I want you to implement into your organization. I started only recently doing that too, because I saw that they're just doing for a checklist. And so this is the main takeaways. I'm going to follow up with you in 6 months, and see how you're doing, because otherwise they're just like, we did it. And then,
did you
really? And so giving them like a to-do list, an actual thing of what they need to start implementing, and seeing how your employees are feeling afterwards. Are they feeling more engaged? Are they feeling more belonged? Do they feel like they can be more themselves at work? Has psychological safety gone up? All these different factors. And then just actually looking at the metrics behind it.
I want to talk about metrics quickly, but I really love what Sam is saying here. It's a culture change, and culture change takes a long time. Thank you for saying that, Sam, because it drives me nuts that people think I'll get this checklist and I'll check all the boxes in 30 days because we had all these people in to do training and now I'm done.
No.
Just not a thing. Not a thing. Just like I talk about like personal brand evolution and discovery, like it's not a thing that happens in one day. You can't just flick a switch and have it.
I think our society is obsessed with instant results. And it's like, no, good things take time. That's the saying. So continue the work.
and I don't know why sometimes we make it more complex than that, right? Like good things take time. You have to keep coming back to it. And I want to come back to, you talked about metrics. You slid it in right at the end there. Yes. And I have mostly a huge problem with most corporate metrics because I feel like they're just, especially when we call them KPIs and they're not, they're just data. Yeah. So what are some things I like had an idea earlier on the show, see if it comes back to me. But what are some of the things that we could do if we're like, okay, we're taking the actions, right? Like we're taking the
Yes.
actions. What are some of the things that are actually beneficial for us to measure in terms of how that is like trickling down into our belonging or into our accessibility?
Yeah, I think, I think psychological safety is a huge part, seeing, okay, how psychological safety people feel beforehand, after we start implementing these things. Okay, it has made a difference. People, I remember one time I did a survey from one company, and then they got the metrics back. This is before my workshop. I was like to get an assessment of, people that wanted to disclose that they are neurodiverse and neurodivergent. And then they were surprised, the people that I was coordinating with, they were surprised that they had neurodivergent employees. And I always think of that because it was so, they're like, we don't know why we were surprised. We're like, what?
But this is exactly the point of conversations like these, right? Because I feel to some degree we know, right? Like you get vibes, right? And you're like, I don't think people would tell me this, even if like I think I've done a good job creating a safe environment. But we know, right? People know. You get a people vibe. So don't ignore your people vibes. People, they're telling you something. But one of the things I just wanted to share, because this I did remember what I had thought of in terms of the tracking from we were talking about leadership training earlier on in the conversation. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if the KPIs that we tracked were like, let's say I have 20 employees, right? What percentage of my employees do I know their preferred like assignment mechanism, right? Like, are they fine if they just hear it verbally? Do they like it in writing? Like, how do they like that? So it's easiest for them to manage, right? Like for me, I used to always we would use Slack, and people would always ask me, they just like tag me in things. And I'm like, I will not see it. I will not see it. If you need something urgently from me, you need to like direct message me. That is the thing you need to do if you want to get my attention. And when we start to learn, like, okay, I know that if I need to get so-and-so's attention, what I need to do is this. And I know that for all of my employees. Then this is the thing where people, maybe you're not surveying the employees directly, but it's things that can show that I'm taking the I'm taking the initiative to go and learn these types of things about my people. So, and all of us, this is the thing that always reminds me. I always think this in marketing because I'm like, we're all consumers, right? Like we all buy things, right? We've all been employees, right? Most of us, or we have an experience of being in some kind of power relationship with another person because we had parent or parental guidance at some point. And we know what it's like. We know what it's like when someone doesn't care about what you think. I know what it's like when someone keeps trying to like assign me things and just saying them off the cuff. And I'm like, I will not remember that. Like, make a note, send it to me via email, and then I will make sure that it is flagged and I do it. And these are not, again, let's say you have, I don't want to talk about the 150 employee people. Let's just talk about the 20 employee people. If you have 20 employees, like these are things that just come up. So create your intention. What do you want to know about them? That could help them be more productive in their job. And then go find one of those things every day. And it will take you less than a month to learn all the things about your 20 employees. All right. Blah, blah, blah. Last hit up of the chat. Sam is sharing to continue to advocate and create more awareness. And that Sydney is doing a great job with this. Change is happening and will continue to happen. It's just slow. And people don't like change, right? This is true. And I do believe that people like change when it's helpful to them. It's still hard to change, right? Yes. And so it's more about us giving people the benefit of the doubt in understanding that it's hard to change. And not only is it hard to change a person, but then if you're looking at an organization that's made up of hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of those individual people, of course, the change is going to be hard. And it doesn't mean that the change isn't worth it at the end of the day. Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that you come and hang out every Friday. Hopefully what we're doing here is giving everyone more insight into how we can create better businesses that support people in a more sustainable way. Sydney, before we wrap up for today, if people are interested in learning more about you and your workshops and anything else in your narrative, where is the best place for people to find you?
Yes, you can find me at my website, accessiblecrates.ca. I believe you can send me a message there and then go to my email and we can get connected.
Yes. And you won't regret having a conversation with Sydney because I've had lots of them and I've regretted none of them. So just like I always say, as we wrap up the end of these shows, if this is a conversation that you are passionate about, don't let this be the last time you hang out in the conversation. Get in the conversation. Sydney is in this conversation. I am in this conversation. She mentioned Dr. Kevin. He is in this conversation. He has a wonderful podcast called Toxic Leadership. You should definitely check it out. Piper was mentioned. She was up here in the chat somewhere. These are the type of people, and quite honestly, everybody in the chat here is interested in accessibility, right? So connect with each other, have conversations, stay in the conversation, because this is how we get all move forward in the direction of
this is how we make change.
This is how we make change. So let's keep doing it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney, for all of your wonderful insights today. Thank you, everyone that was in the chat. There were so many of you today. Usually I try to keep track of it, but you guys are just blowing up the chat. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to see the t-shirts about the weirdness. So Sam and Osana, keep us posted. And until next week, everybody, permission to do you.